So in this video we're going to start to work with our custom.css file to bring our design together. So let's start off by selecting the body element and setting the font family, which is our Google font. Source Sans Pro, and as a fallback we'll say sans serif, any sans serif font. And our font weight, I'm going to set that to 300. Now we want to set our container -fluid element, or class I should say, to have a maximum width of 1200 pixels. As our container fluid will be 100% of the page width, we don't want 100% of the page width when the browser is very wide, so we want to set that to a maximum of 1200. So the width of the page will be at a maximum of 1200 pixels, so it won't look funny. I want to style our button, so button -large. Going to give that some extra padding. I'm going to say 16 pixels top and bottom and 32 pixels left and right. Now we want to do the button primary. Want to change some colors. So we want to say background to this 34495E color and a border color of 2C 3E50. Now for the button primary class, when it's in its hover state, or the hover pseudo class, let's say background is 2C 3E50, basically the opposite of what's going on here, to give it a kind of an inverted feel when you hover over it. And the border color is set to 34495E. For our form controls, i.e. the inputs, we want to give them a height of 50 pixels and a padding of 12 pixels on the top and bottom and 24 pixels on the left and right. I'm also going to add in some styling for our lead and info classes. So for the lead class, I want to give it a bit bigger font size. Font size of 1.8 EMs. And for the info class, as these are linked together, I'm just going to kind of chain them together for ease of finding them later. I'm going to give it a font family of our other font, our Roboto slab, and get a serif fallback font. Set the font weight to 100, the font size to 1.2 ems, and padding 0 pixels on the top, 0 pixels on the right, 25 pixels on the bottom, and 0 pixels on the left. Now the last thing I want to do in this video is actually style our navigation so we can have it looking the way we want. So we'll say navbar, we'll give it a margin bottom of 0 pixels because it currently has a margin bottom and I don't really like that in this design. And a navbar default, remember that's the navbar we're using. I'm going to have a background of 34495E, border color transparent, so basically the background color, and a border radius of 0 pixels to cancel out the pre-existing border radius. So navbar -default, and then within that element with the class of navbar default, we want to say navbar -brand and navbar default navbar -nav, with a direct child being a list item, and within that list item an anchor element. I'm going to say color is white. And then here we're going to say navbar -default navbar toggle icon bar Remember, they're the little bars on our little button within our nav bar. We'll say background color. Of 7, F8, C8D. Then we want to say navbar hyphen default navbar nav direct child is a list item, and then an anchor element within that list item. I'm going to say in its hover state. Navbar default navbar brand. Oh, there's a comma. You may notice I'm chaining a lot of these together. It doesn't really make a difference. It's just better to group them together sometimes. And you'll notice I'm using the comma a lot. And that pretty much says this element and any other elements preceded by a comma, one after the other. So navbar brand, hover, and then navbar default navbar brand, and focus. Want to apply the same styling. We'll say background is white, and border color is 34495E, and the color is 2C3E50. And just a little bit more to go. Navbar hyphen default navbar toggle, and background of 34495E. Again, you'll see some of these colors repeating, and a little bit more to go. Don't worry, not too much longer. Navbar hyphen default navbar hyphen nav in its hover state, navbar default navbar hyphen nav lia in its focus state, navbar hyphen default nav bar hyphen nav direct child is an element with a class of open, then an anchor element. I actually copy some of these navbar defaults. It's very repetitive. Navbar default navbar hyphen nav, the class of open, hover, and I'm going to copy this one. Focus. Now we can apply some styling to that very long group of selectors. Color is 2C3E50. Background color is white. Now we've got the navbar brand padding of 25 pixels all round. Set the height to auto and use the important flag. One last selector, navbar hyphen toggle, give it some padding of 12 pixels, margin top 12.5 pixels, margin bottom 12.5 pixels, and a border radius of 0 pixels. So now that we have that implemented, we're going to have one media query for this entire project, and we actually want to address an issue within the navbar. So at media, with a minimum width of 768 pixels, so something larger than an iPad in portrait orientation, say navbar hyphen nav list item, anchor element. We want to say padding, top is 25 pixels, and padding bottom is 25 pixels. So now that we have all that set up, let's save this and bring it up in the browser. Now as you can see, we have our nice little nav bar. We've changed it quite dramatically. And we have our little buttons rendering with that dark kind of asphalt blue. And when we scroll in, still have our little toggle for the menu, and there we go. Looks quite nice.